Millionaire dares his maid to dance waltz. What she does leaves everyone shocked. The ballroom was filled with glittering chandeliers, laughter, and gowns that swept across the polished marble floor. In the midst of all this luxury, she stood silently in her uniform, unnoticed, unimportant, invisible, a maid among millionaires. But that night, she became the target of cruel amusement. A wealthy man, drunk on power, sneered and pointed. "If you can dance this waltz, then maybe you're worthy to marry my son." Laughter erupted, echoing like knives through the hall. They thought it was a joke. They thought she would crumble. But what none of them knew was that beneath her humble uniform beat the heart of a champion. Her name was Althea. She was young, quiet, and disciplined, working long hours as a maid in one of the wealthiest families' estates. To the guests, she was no more than a shadow, clearing glasses, wiping tables, blending into the background of their wealth. But behind her silence was a story no one cared to ask about. Years before, Althea had lived a different life. She had been a dancer, graceful, elegant, and unstoppable on the competition floor. But tragedy struck when her mother grew ill, and she gave it all up to take care of her family. Dreams of stages and trophies faded into nights of scrubbing floors and carrying trays. On this particular evening, the estate glowed with extravagance. The millionaire host, Mr. Lancaster, had gathered his wealthy friends for a masquerade ball. Women in diamond necklaces whispered behind painted fans, while men in tailored suits boasted of fortunes. Althea moved silently, balancing a tray of crystal glasses, careful not to make mistakes. But wealth breeds arrogance, and arrogance always needs someone to mock. When Mr. Lancaster's eyes landed on her, the moment of cruelty was inevitable. He smirked, his voice booming above the orchestra. "Perhaps we should see if our maid has talent. What do you say, gentlemen?" The crowd laughed, their eyes burning into her skin. She froze, the tray trembling in her hands. Then came his cruel challenge, wrapped in humiliation and mockery. "Dance this waltz, maid. Dance before us all. And if you manage to impress, perhaps you'll be good enough to marry my son." The room erupted in laughter. For them, it was nothing but sport. For Althea, it was the moment her past collided with her present. The orchestra faltered, then resumed with a playful tune, as if mocking her further. Guests leaned forward, smirks plastered across their painted faces, waiting for the spectacle of a maid fumbling across polished marble floors. Althea's heart pounded, her palms damp, yet her face remained calm. Years of enduring whispered insults and sharp dismissals had trained her to show nothing. Mr. Lancaster's son, seated at the corner, shifted uncomfortably. He hadn't asked for this game, but he said nothing. Silence, after all, was safer than defying his father. Althea stepped forward. Every eye pinned her like daggers. She placed the tray down, lifted her chin, and faced the glittering hall. Somewhere deep inside, the rhythm she had buried long ago began to stir. The music swelled. Her first steps were hesitant, almost clumsy, enough to spark giggles from the crowd. But then, she let go. Her feet remembered. The years melted away. One turn became two became a sweeping arc, her arms gliding with the elegance of a swan. Gasps began to ripple through the hall as the maid they mocked transformed before their eyes. The gown she wore may have been plain, the uniform of servitude, but in motion it became something else, an emblem of grace. She spun with precision, glided with elegance, her every movement echoing years of practice, pain, and sacrifice. She wasn't just dancing, she was reclaiming the stage that life had stolen from her. The crowd's laughter turned into stunned silence. Whispered questions floated through the hall. Who is she? How does she move like that? Even the orchestra seemed to sense the shift, their music swelling as if to honor her revival. Mr. Lancaster's smug smile faltered. He had expected humiliation, not this revelation. His hand gripped the edge of his chair, knuckles whitening as the maid he mocked commanded the room he ruled. Some guests looked away in shame. Others couldn't tear their eyes from her. And his son leaned forward, captivated, a small smile breaking through his unease. Step by step, Althea dismantled the cruelty that had been thrown at her. Every twirl was defiance. Every glide was proof. Every lift of her chin was a declaration. You will not define me by the uniform I wear. The music neared its crescendo. She spun one final time, her arms outstretched, her body pausing in perfect stillness. The chandeliers above seemed to hold their breath. And then, silence. The hall erupted in thunderous applause, The same people who had mocked her now rising to their feet, their cheers echoing in disbelief. But Althea did not bow for them. She stood tall, her chest rising and falling, eyes fixed not on the millionaire who mocked her, but on the freedom she had reclaimed in that dance. Mr. Lancaster rose to his feet, his face flushed with anger, confusion, and something he had never felt before, powerlessness. His carefully constructed world, where wealth dictated worth, had been shattered by the very maid he sought to humiliate. "This is absurd," he muttered, but his words were drowned by the applause. His son, no longer silent, rose too, clapping louder than anyone else. And in his eyes was admiration, not pity. The room had shifted. The hierarchy, the rules, the unspoken lines between servant and master, had been rewritten in the span of a waltz. Althea stood in the center of it all, breathless but unbroken. For years, she had swallowed the bitterness of inequality. For years, she had carried the weight of invisibility. But tonight, she was undeniable. The crowd demanded her name. Whispers turned to shouts. Who is she? She's incredible. The millionaire's attempt at mockery had backfired into a spectacle of admiration. His son stepped forward, offering his hand, not as a mockery, but as recognition. Althea looked at it for a long moment, then shook her head. Her message was clear. She did not need their approval, nor their pity. She had danced for herself, not for them. Gasps filled the hall, but her defiance only strengthened the impact of her victory. And with that, she turned, walking back to her station, not as a maid, but as a woman who had reminded them all that worth is not worn in gowns or diamonds, but carried in the spirit. The ballroom would never forget that night. For days, whispers of the maid who danced like a queen spread beyond the estate, reaching even those who hadn't been there to witness it. Some tried to dismiss it as a curiosity, a strange fluke, but others knew better. They had seen the truth with their own eyes. Althea continued her work, but she was no longer invisible. The same guests who once ignored her now greeted her with respect, though she never sought their validation. What mattered was that she had reclaimed a part of herself she thought lost forever. And for Mr. Lancaster? He avoided speaking of that night altogether. For him, it was not just humiliation, but exposure. His cruelty had revealed his weakness, and the strength of the woman he had tried to belittle. But perhaps the greatest change was in his son. He sought Althea out in quiet moments, not with arrogance, but with sincerity. He wanted to learn her story, to understand the woman beyond the dance. Still, Althea remained cautious. For too long, she had been measured by others' expectations. That night had taught her one thing clearly: dignity does not come from wealth or approval, it comes from within. The final irony was this: when Mr. Lancaster had mocked her with the words, "If you dance this waltz, you marry my son," he had tried to reduce her worth to entertainment. But in reality, her dance had shown that she was far above his games. She had danced not for marriage, not for recognition, but for freedom. And as the echoes of that waltz lingered in the marble halls, one question remained, pressing in the minds of all who witnessed it. How many more Altheas walk unseen among us, women and men, mocked and underestimated, carrying greatness that the world refuses to see?